What's up, you dirty little grinders? Have you done your grinding today? I bet you have. And for those who are new to my channel and always ask me, what the hell do you mean by grinding, evil dear? I mean you do that task that you need to do every day to progress at your goal, whatever that may be. For the majority of people, it's language learning. For other people, it's like, I don't know, physical grinding. Maybe with other people, you know, like physical to physical. Or it could be virtual people. You could be like grinding against yourself, against... The fuck am I going with this? Okay, let's have a look at this video right here. This is your brain on Klingon, which is the linguistic equivalent of crack from what I've heard. So we're going to be checking out this video. Apparently it's about constructed languages, and I am a speaker of a couple of constructed languages, although I am fluent in one, which is Esperanto. For those who have never heard of constructed languages or anything like that before, you're going to find out a lot in this video. And for those who have got some type of hate boner towards constructed languages, I will find you and annihilate 3 generations of your family. So please make peace with that. Okay, let's watch this video.
Your brain on Klingon and your brain on English are surprisingly similar. In fact, it turns out our brains respond to artificial languages much like natural ones.
Okay, I can see why she started with this, because a lot of people seem to be surprised about this. They're like, oh my god, you can fluently speak like a constructed language? Because, like, it's constructed. But, like, at the end of the day, your brain does not care if a language is constructed or not. If you know and you speak the language fluently, to your brain, it's just a language. In fact, the whole constructed versus natural thing is more of like a historical, like, matter, as opposed to anything to do with linguistics itself. Unless you're trying to create one of those languages which is literally just brain fuck. You know, it's just there to say, what would happen if the concept of time did not exist in this language? You know, like, you're trying to break what we expect of languages and what humans are capable of thinking about, type of thing. But at the end of the day, a constructed language is exactly like a natural language, and I'm sure whatever she's going to talk about is going to basically end with that conclusion.
But what does that tell us? For centuries, philosophers of language have debated what constitutes a language. If English isn't a language, what is? Ditto French or Latin or Urdu or Brazilian Portuguese, but are whistled languages also languages?
Okay, I hate getting into debates with philosophers, at least modern age philosophers. The ones that I've met, I feel like they say they're philosophers, but realistically what they are is shit stirrers, man. They just want to debate something for the sake of debating it, okay? And realistically, I could probably put linguists in that same category, because you'll be like, oh, this word means this, and I'll be like, well, semantically, it can't cover that type of ground right there. But, I guess in this specific dialect over there, it could possibly cover that. But what is bread? What is bread? And you're like, what the fuck, man? I was just discussing what we're having for lunch. But anyway, like, constructed languages, natural languages, as I've already stated, they're basically the same thing. And if you really want to dig into it, at the end of the day, like, for example, most languages have some artificial element that's been injected into them in some, like, historical occurrence or whatever reason, you know, like... English has had parts that have been artificially created, German, Italian, like, you can look into it, you'll find it. Hell, Hebrew, like, if you get into, like, reconstructed languages based on dead languages, let's talk Cornish and friggin' various Australian Aboriginal languages, what is the difference between constructed language and, like, a language that's just, like, being reborn? Because, like, if the last native speaker disappeared, you're basically recreating that thing like it's some fucking zombified language type of thing. I actually saw a great example of this. I was watching YouTube the other day, which, you know, I do that every now and then, and they were talking about this whole situation of how some American company has brought direwolves back to life, and people are like, oh my god, direwolves, this is fucking amazing. And then other people, you know, the ones that sit in the comments and they're like, I hate to be the guy who ruins the party, but it's technically not a direwolf because, well, all they did is took a grey wolf and then they just messed up its DNA to make it look like a direwolf. That's how I feel about languages that have been, like, you know, reborn from languages that have died. They're basically, you know, they're just being reconstructed, and now I've just pointed at the fact that I am the shit stirrer. Fuck.
Is math, music. What we mean when we call something a language is itself up for philosophical debate. Trust me, philosophers are so fun at parties. But some cognitive neuroscientists, like the ones in the Fedorenko lab at MIT, are adding some empirical measurements to the mix by looking at our brains as we interface with linguistic elements. Science can't define what a language is for us, but we can use scientific techniques to see what types of reasoning and communication our brain treats the same as it treats natural language. And when it comes to measuring how our brains treat that reasoning and communication, the most Common tools of the cognitive neuroscience trade are things like the functional MRI, which measures blood flow to different regions of the brain. They also measure electrical signals with electroencephalography. Magnetic fields create...
I'm just imagining right now what they've done is they've got a bunch of like Conlangers, basically people who speak constructed languages, brought them all into a room and just for a second visualize this, okay? Close your eyes. Imagine a bunch of giga nerds walking into a room at some science laboratory. You got the Klingon guys who've got like the freaking, they got the makeup on, okay? They got like the little ridges on their head. They got the full Klingon armor. They got the battle axe and stuff, because I have never seen a like devoted Klingon speaker who is not in gear. You put a camera in front of them, they're like Superman, man. They'll walk into a cupboard and they'll come out in full Klingon regalia type of thing. And like, if you go look at like pretty much any constructed language, they've got their thing, okay? So I'm just imagining all these guys. You got the Elvish guys on the right, the Klingons on the left, and these confused looking Esperanto nerds in the middle, just all staring down at each other.
Aided by our brain's electrical signals using magnetic encephalography and other imaging and recording techniques that are variations on the theme of measuring what parts of the brain have activity while doing this thing. So, what have those techniques taught us? For one, our brains don't respond to everything with language in the name the same way it responds to natural languages.
Okay.
Previous studies found that programming languages, like Python, don't use the same functional regions of the brain as natural language.
Did they really need to study for that? Like, that seems obvious to me. Well, okay, it seems obvious to me because I am a programmer and also a speaker of constructed languages and natural languages. Well, I think everyone's a speaker of a natural language. I hope. Anyway, like, the point being here is if you look at a programming language, forget the word language. I can see, I guess, why people get confused, because they see you typing if blah, blah, blah on your keyboard, and they're like, well, that must be a language. Not really, okay? So those, like, words that we're typing, they're more like tokens. They're just like visualizations of switches that are happening behind the scenes type of thing. It's more akin to like building with Lego and putting stuff together, or like Meccano sets, you know. It's not like I can just walk down to the kitchen and start talking to my wife in fluent C++. If open bracket wife equal happy close bracket open curly bracket execute function make sandwich. Oh god, no! I'm in trouble now. Exception, program's crashing.
Instead, we use a different network, the multiple demand network in the middle layer, which we also use for math and some types of reasoning tasks. These researchers then wanted to see if artificial constructed languages, aka Conlangs, are processed the same way English is, or instead the way Python is, or maybe even a secret third thing. To do so, they had to get data from a range of Conlang users, which resulted in a wildly nerdy conference.
Look at her face. She's the biggest giga nerd ever. I love it. Okay. I can just see her running this experiment, sitting at the front of the room going, okay, first question, which is the best Conlang? And just watching it unfold.
These scientists hosted a conference at MIT and invited a bunch of people from various Conlang communities. There were
You know, I'm gonna be completely honest. There was no need for this experiment. This experiment did not need to exist at all. But someone figured out that they could get funding if they could bring in their nerdy mates who speak random constructed languages and do an experiment around that, you know, to prove a theory or something. There was no need for this at all. This is like completely obvious. What happened is you got one nerd in the science team who's like, I can figure out how we can get some funding and have a good time at the same time.
Speakers of Esperanto, a language intended for international communication. There were speakers of Klingon from Star Trek, Navi from the Avatar film series, and High Valyrian and Dothraki from the Game of Thrones TV series.
God damn, they actually... Okay, so for Dothraki, I know of literally one guy who speaks that language, and I only know him online, and I actually made a video about Dothraki like ages ago, so if you want to go check it out, there'll be a just search my channel for Dothraki. But for High Valyrian, I've never actually met someone who speaks this, although it is available as a course on Duolingo, or at least it was in the past. What was the other one? Oh, Klingon. I actually know a couple of people who speak Klingon, but they also speak Esperanto, which therefore would make them pacifist warmongers.
Creators of some of the languages were on site. Not the creator of Esperanto, of course. That was invented in 1887.
They're just digging up old mate Zamenhof. Bitch, get out of here! We gotta test you! Okay, I'm gonna say some like controversial shit, okay? So ages ago, I was like reading Wikipedia about like some random Esperanto, like esoteric friggin' knowledge, and apparently there is like this old recording of Zamenhof like speaking. It's like one of those like super old grey black and white ones where they probably did it on friggin' wax, okay? And it's like literally him going turning at like a conference or something, and there's like a voice recording, and I remember listening to the voice recording, and it's like, it's shit quality because it's over 100+ years old, but it's very short, and I remember listening to it going, fuck, Zamenhof sounds like a noob, man, like his Esperanto doesn't sound that good. Which makes sense because, like, that was probably one of the few instances where he could actually speak it with other people because, like, you know, back then there wasn't many people who spoke it. Unlike nowadays where I can just go down the road and throw a shoe at my mate's house type of thing and make him come outside. But, like, yeah, if they brought Zamenhof back, he'd probably be shat on for his shitty grammar, like his spoken grammar. I'm sure his written grammar is perfectly fine.
But each language had expert speakers constructing linguistic examples in each Conlang to test the conference attendees. Those attendees, in turn, completed self-assessments of their competence in their Conlang of choice, actually tested that competence, and then they got a whole battery of brain activity tests while using and listening to that language. I share these methodological details to tell you how this research was performed, yeah, sure. But also because the mental image of this Conlang conference for linguistic turbo nerds is delightful.
It so is. It so is. You got like a freaking classroom full of like students, the Klingon speakers just sitting there going, and then you got the Esperanto speakers just sitting next to him going, "Kilo fek estas tio."
And I bet it was so much fun. And before we move on, a few details to note about the languages in question. All of them are artificially constructed languages by definition, but because they were each constructed for different purposes, including many for film and television, the languages themselves have different features that could be relevant to how our brains process them. For instance, Esperanto was built to be an easy-to-pick-up second language for people who may have spoke any of a wide range of primary languages. The language started out with fewer than 1,000 root meanings that could be expanded with prefixes, suffixes, and compounds, which means a language learner doesn't have to learn as many vocab words and can understand new words as long as they already understand the root word and they understand the structure that modifies it.
That was like 130 years ago. It has expanded a little bit since then.
Its vocabulary and structure overtly draw on existing Indo-European languages in particular to make it easy to learn for speakers of those languages. You can even see that in the length.
I'm just going to be like nitpicky right now. Yes, it draws on Indo-European languages, but it has been heavily influenced by East Asian languages specifically. So the grammar has actually become more agglutinative over time. So basically we had like prepositions in the original Esperanto, which were literally just prepositions, or like the suffixes and stuff that were literally just suffixes, but now they can be standalone words that can actually be modified.
Language name. Esperanto translates as one who hopes, and it's related to the English word aspire, the French word espoir, the Spanish word espero, and so on.
For those who are curious about where the name Esperanto came from, or Esperanto, as we would say in Esperanto, basically it came from the pen name of Zamenhof, the guy who created the language, and he just used that as a pen name because he was living in the Russian Empire at the time, and like there was a little bit of an issue with certain things around Jews and stuff like that. So basically, he just didn't want to cause any problems, and basically used a pen name, and somehow that stuck as the language name. I guess it just sounds better than universal language.
Esperanto's purpose is to be an easy-to-learn international language, and we can see that reflected in the features that are built into the intentional construction of this language. Klingon, on the other hand, is a fictional language spoken by space aliens, whose language did not evolve in dialectic with Earth's languages, so it is built to be intentionally avoiding resemblance with existing languages. Obviously, it still has to be capable of being spoken by human actors on the TV show, but
Here's a little bit of like interesting info about Klingon. So yes, it was designed to be as different from English as possible, so it took different sounds that don't exist in English, although they couldn't go too far from English with sounds because it did have to be like a spoken language in a TV show, and also the grammar then was just like wildly different to English. But what would often happen as the actors went on set and they used the language, I forget the name of the creator. He's like Mark, I believe, something. Anyway, like if I get that wrong, the Klingon speakers will like impale me in the chat. But anyway, what would happen is he would see them, he would notice that they made pronunciation mistakes, and he would literally change the language and introduce exceptions and stuff based on what the actors did.
Sounds and grammar deliberately eschew the most common linguistic patterns and features of English in particular, right down to the word order. It's the opposite of Esperanto.
Okay, I gotta find this out now. I need to know the name of the creator of Klingon. Ah, yes, that's right, Mark Okrand.
One built to feel familiar to speakers of natural Earth languages, one built to feel alien. And that is the kind of thing we could imagine our brains responding differently to. Or maybe linguistic completeness really matters in some way. A lot of Klingon vocab is about spacecraft, a lot less is about the bakery aisle at the grocery store.
This is actually completely true what she's saying right now, because Klingon it's got like a very large vocab for like space-based terms and like battle terms and stuff like that. But everyday like items that you need words for, it just doesn't have words for, and they've been slowly being like introduced into the language over time. And someone actually did try speak Klingon to their child as their child was growing up. The child picked up some Klingon, but then eventually just abandoned it. Mainly, according to what I've read, the reasons being is because, well, no one else spoke Klingon apart from the dad, and also the fact that the language just could not encompass everything. Like you just couldn't talk about like everyday items because there was just no words for it, and they were like really stretching this space-based terminology to try cover like everyday items.
Heck, maybe the community of speakers matters. According to estimates in this paper, tens of thousands of people speak Esperanto, but only about 10 people in the world actually use Dothraki as a language.
I think that's an underestimate of Esperanto speakers. I generally say in the hundreds of thousands. Like tens of thousands is really, really small. And I know that's probably nowhere near true because I've gone to international meetups like the Universal Esperanto Congress, and you'll usually get several thousand people there. So that doesn't make sense. Are we getting like 10% of all speakers in the world going to one location? Hell no, man. Definitely not. I could tell you maybe only a select few from Australia will go to this international meeting every year. The vast majority will never go.
Totally possible that our brains treat that differently from a language that we, use at the bank. But here's a figure from the paper that shows brain activity patterns in speakers of each of these conlangs, which I'm comparing against natural language patterns from the review article we saw earlier. On the right, you can see that all of the different conlangs have activation in roughly the same functional regions of interest, and they all match the pattern we associate with the language network of the brain on the left. Also, while we're looking at this, I just think it's very whimsical how they made the plots for the Na'vi blue and the Klingon ones match.
What she's pointing out here is like the color coding and stuff like that. I swear to God, whoever organized this study was definitely a Conlang nerd. They did this shit on purpose, man. Like, they know their culture. They got the Esperanto colors down, the Na'vi, the High Valyrian, the Dothraki. Like, this is not... Yeah, sure, you could probably go Google this shit, but, like, the commitment here is an indication.
Warp's uniform, the Esperanto plot, matches the Esperanto flag and all that. They didn't have to do that. It's just a little cute. And I like it.
She's such a nerd. Such a giga nerd. I love it.
And here's the thing. On some level, it feels pretty intuitive that our brain treats conlangs that are used as a language as languages. Even ones like Klingon that don't share a lot of features with these speakers' primary languages. It didn't surprise me to read this paper and learn that our brains respond to Python differently than they respond to English or Esperanto. Yeah, we call it a programming language, but reading code does subjectively feel like a distinct cognitive activity from reading the comments in that same code. So, on some level, these results may seem almost trivially true.
Look, as a programmer and a speaker of constructed languages, there's a very big difference between how you think about programming versus how you think when you're just speaking a language. It's very different.
Wow, our brain can't tell the difference between a natural and constructed language. But bring it back to Python for a moment. What is it about Python that makes our brain handle it differently? I mean, Python's got syntax, it's got semantics, and though its purpose is to ultimately compile to bytecode on a machine, it's still written in a way that humans are intended to comprehend and derive meaning from.
I think a programming language is probably more akin to like a musical language. So when you're reading sheet music, now I don't actually do any music, so I could completely be wrong about this. So maybe someone who is both a programmer and a musician can add their comments here. But like, I see it as when you're typing on that keyboard, you know, playing a piano, reading the sheet music, you may be thinking about how you're going to play out this song and how you want to change things and stuff. But it's not like you're going to be able to stand up and then just start speaking pianoese, you know? Like, it doesn't work like that. Now, there is a Conlang that did attempt that, which is called Sol Rel Sol.
It's got plenty of features of things used in human language. The Venn diagram simply isn't a perfect circle with those natural human languages. So there's a whole continuum of constructions that have linguistic features but don't activate our brain the same way natural language does, like Python. And then at the...
You know, I'm actually curious to see a study on, and there's probably been studies about this stuff before, but like I've never heard about this stuff. It's like when we look at languages, there's common patterns across most languages. We have like, you know, the most common word orders, the most common sounds and stuff like this. And then you've got languages which have got like rare sounds and some got rare word orders and rare this and that. I'm not talking about like this common versus rareness. What I'm actually thinking about more is there any linguistic element of a language that is actually out there that does exist but has been shown to be like harder for the brain to process in some way. Like, it's like the brain has to try and logically apply this as opposed to it just being more natural. I'm sure it doesn't exist, but that would be something that would be curious to look into. And that's where I get like interest in languages like Lojban and stuff like this, because they are constructed languages which are now kind of stepping almost outside the realm of what could naturally evolve, and therefore are they pushing the limits of what the human brain can do processing-wise? Now, I know there is actual speakers of Lojban, so obviously not, but is there aspects of Lojban which are actually hard for the brain to process?
The other end of the spectrum, there are constructions that activate our brain exactly the way natural language does. Apparently like a high Valyrian. By doing this study, these cognitive neuroscientists found that place for Conlangs on the continuum. In so doing, it teaches us that, 1, none of the features that make Conlangs different from each other, and 2, none of the features that make Conlangs different from natural languages are deal breakers when it comes to activating our brain's language network. It's yet another condition that compares and contrasts against brain activity patterns for spoken natural languages, or whistled languages, or sign languages, or pidgin languages from different language speakers who were thrown together and trying to figure out some way to communicate. And we can look at how all of those stack up against even more distant types.
I'm going to segue a little bit right now. I'm going to talk a bit about Auslan. Now, I don't know Auslan, but I have friends who are Auslan users, and one of them who actually speaks Esperanto as well, so he's not deaf, he just learnt Auslan. And I remember, like, he likes to meet up with me because he also has Tourette's. And one of the most interesting, most fascinating things I found with him and Tourette's, and he is well aware of this, is the fact that depending on the language he's thinking in at that moment will be the language that his Tourette's activates within. And I remember seeing it happen obviously in English, his native language, but then it would happen in Esperanto. So we'd be walking down the street together and he will be swearing his ass off in Esperanto. And that's why he likes to hang out with me, because no one else understands, so there's no problem there. But also, he has the same problem in Auslan, where he will just start doing rude signs. So it's fascinating that, you know, like a language which is obviously you're using your body as opposed to your voice and your ears, actually has like that same type of connection in the brain and the same type of problems.
Types of cognition, like music. The more of this continuum we populate, the more we learn about our brain's internal architecture of language. So even if it seems trivial at first that, yeah, our brains brain on Esperanto pretty much the same way they brain for English, in fact, it meaningfully contributes to a larger body of literature aimed at identifying how our brains assemble these various aspects of the tools we use to communicate, and which features prompt our brain to use the language network that has gotten us so far. And what can one say to that but goodbye? Wait, that's a Balkan Chester. That's a whole different language.
Oh my god, you just insulted the Klingon speakers. Okay, no, she did that on purpose. But overall, basically, I guess the conclusion here is exactly what I already understood and believed and kind of just knew intrinsically. But like, it was a good video. I love how nerdy she is. This is great. So this is her channel here. May contains science. May. Yeah, you guys should go and subscribe to that channel. I enjoyed this video quite a bit. And let me know what you guys think about constructed languages, I guess, in the comments if you don't speak one at all. And I'll see you all in the next video. And if you are that one with the hard on who doesn't like constructed languages, remember, 3 generations.